So without further ado, let's dive into this webinar that is on leadership support. This is part of our series in webinars where we talk about evidence-based interventions for managing organizational change. Now, this is a particularly tough subject because it's all about being able to manage your senior stakeholders, senior leaders in the organization, and make sure that they adequately support change initiatives that you're involved in. My name is Jordanov. I'm a cognitive neuropsychologist and head of behavioral science at Neurofied. I'll be talking you through our insights today, going through some practical interventions, but also some key theories about leadership support in organizational change management. Our organization, Neurofied, is a behavioral science company. We help organizations change, and we help them develop, we help them grow, innovate. And we do this with insights from behavioral science and psychology. We're a team of behavioral scientists that are absolutely fascinated with human behavior and everything that entails that. And we are very fortunate and lucky to work with so many great clients that put trust in us, put trust in our experiments, and put trust in the results that we drive together. Some news, these webinars are part of the book series, and the book that we have written on organizational change management and how to apply behavioral science to enhance it is actually on pre-sale right now. It finally happened. It was a long project, but our publisher Wiley came through here, and you can pre-order it on all the large retail channels like Amazon, bol.com. For the Dutch people around, you can get it on Management Boeken and Bruna as well. It's published internationally. Alex will see to it that there is a link in the chat where you can get more information. And this webinar is exactly aimed at going into some of the insights of the book. One of the chapters is about leadership support, and we're going to give a sneak peek, a practical sneak peek of that right now. You have to wait a little longer for the book to land on your doormat, but by all calculations, it should be there around 1st, 2nd, 3rd of April, early April, let's say that. But you can already pre-order it. There will be an ebook version soon as well, and we're super excited to hear what you think of all this, what we wrote. So today we're going to dive into one of the key topics in organizational change management, which is about gaining and maintaining leadership support. We're going into some evidence-based interventions that can help you do this. And we'll do that from two perspectives. We're going to go into interventions that are aimed at the perspective of the change manager or the person that is driving change or the team that is driving change, and how they can make sure that leaders are involved adequately, are supporting and are sponsoring the change. And we're also going to provide some interventions from the senior leadership perspective. So you imagine you're a senior leader in your organization. There is a proposed change, but you want to make sure that you make the right decisions and offer the right type of support and sponsorship. So it's going to be from two sides, to get both sides of the coin so that we can really encapsulate this concept of leadership support nicely. Of course, we've written an entire chapter of an entire book about this, so we're gonna scratch the surface, but we're gonna do it in such a way that you will have some very practical insights after you walk away from this webinar and enjoy lunch, hopefully. So, starting with the key thesis around these interventions, our brains are hardwired to resist change in predictable ways. This is something that I keep repeating, and my team is also echoing. And of course, we are not averse to all types of change as humans. But when we look at organizational change, complex organizational change in the uncertain and complex and volatile times that we live in, oftentimes we see that both employees and managers and also directors are not always, going with the flow, as we would say. They're not always engaging in changes as they should be. And that is because our brains are hardwired to be naturally aversive to some types of changes that might impose risk to our resources, changes that might impose risk to our ego or our relationships. And this makes organizational change such a complex puzzle, especially when we look at leadership support, when there are different layers involved. And we're not only talking about rational and logical organizational dynamics, but also about the human side of it, the intuitions, the emotions, the human instincts that all surface when we look at driving organizational change in a productive and sustained way. When we narrow this down a little bit and we look at the brains of leaders that are involved in organizational change, we see different types of phenomena that get into play that might be challenging to leading change, to being a supportive and sponsoring leader in organizational changes. We're going to go through these and we'll get into an in-depth review of this as well in this webinar. But these are terms that you might have heard before already, like the intention action gap. There's always a bit of a chasm between our intentions. We're going to go in 100%. We're going to drive this change. We're going to make sure it's a success. And action, what we actually do on a day-to-day basis. So this is in psychology often described as the intention action gap. It's a very, very well researched phenomenon. And it's something that happens in each and every organization. Well-intentioned stakeholders that are in the end not able to allocate the right amount of time and resources to useful behavioral change, what they actually do on a day-to-day basis. Same goes for leaders here. We have things like the planning fallacy. There are thousands and thousands of academic papers about how the best decision makers keep overestimating planning decisions. They say, oh, we can do it in an X amount of time. We can do it with an X amount of budget. We can do it with an X amount of people. And time after time, we see that this is considerably on the generous end. They're way too optimistic and overconfident in planning. That's not because they lack skills or intelligence. It's because we have these hardwired patterns into our brains that influence our decision making. There's also the sunk cost fallacy, which is related to that. When we do invest in a certain organizational change, we have a project that we really want to see through. We often don't see when the project is not, meeting its ends, when it's not paying off as we wanted it to pay off. But we keep investing more resources, more time into it. And this is called the sunk cost fallacy. So we have all these fallacies, these biases, these gaps, these barriers in our psychology and our behavior that might get in the way of effective organizational change. And the problem with these barriers, and especially those cognitive biases, these patterns in our decision making and thinking that may result in predictable errors when it comes down to planning, when it comes down to resource allocation, when it comes down to behavior change. They're super pesky and persistent and hard to mitigate in organizational change management because they're hardwired into our minds, as I just said. Cognitive biases are a fact of human beings. It's the way that our brains have evolved over many, many, many eons. They're also subconscious. They're not observable or measurable. You can, even if you were to put someone in a brain scanner, all the people in an organization, you wouldn't be able to measure specific biases. You can only see them when they manifested in organizational behavior, which is often counterproductive to organizational goals and objectives. Biases are usually not contributing to, for example, a change that an organization wants to go through. But in some cases they can. Now, another problem is that these biases and barriers can be amplified by organizational factors. If we have organizational culture, if we have small group dynamics, if we have particular leaders or managers that follow certain profiles that might be counterproductive to psychological safety or to sustained behavior change, we see that these individual biases and barriers, the sunk cost fallacy, the intention action gap, become an even bigger problem because they're amplified by the organizational context. So it's not to get too deep into this right now, but when you add the psychological domain to organizational change, you can see why it's so hard. Humans are complex creatures. Our behavior, the way that we make decisions and the way that we act is quite complex. But by beginning to understand these driving factors, and that goes way beyond just cognitive biases or individual barriers, but by understanding the landscape, the system that we're dealing with, it becomes a bit easier to navigate. And that's exactly what we're going to do right now. We're going to dive into some practical tools. And I wanted to highlight that these tools are not aimed at taking biases out of people. They're not aimed to de-bias human individuals completely, because that's impossible. We'll always have, our biases, our intuitions, our emotions, our instincts, that what makes us human, which is good. It also contributes to decision making, but sometimes biases can get into the way. And these types of interventions that we're going to go over now are not about debiasing people, they're about debiasing processes. They're about taking bias out of organizational culture, out of organizational policy, out of organizational change management strategy, to make sure that we create a context in which change is happening naturally, more positively, and also becomes more sustained in behavior. And this all sounds, from a theoretical point of view, a bit vague. I'm aware of that. That's why we will dive into the practicalities right now. We're going to go through 3 interventions that we cover in the book about leadership support. And we're going to, of course, we could talk for days about each and every one of these interventions, but we'll go through a high-level explanation, giving you some practical handholds so that you can already start experimenting and applying these. Starting with the first one. This is called if-then planning, and it's an amazing tool for facilitating role modeling, especially at the leadership level. But more broadly, it's a tool that can really help stakeholders move from intention to action. So that intention-action gap that we discussed, this is a very, very strong way to mitigate that problem and to put people from just intention to actual behavior change. It comes from famous psychologist Peter Gollwitzer, who has researched this very extensively, and ever since then, dozens of academics have dedicated their careers to these types of behavior changes. In academia, this is usually known as implementation intentions, which is actually it's a more fancy word for if-then planning and other concepts. And what it means is, how can we get people to actually implement their intentions, bridge the intention-action gap? The way that they do that is by connecting an if scenario, so a desired or a prompt in the environment, or a trigger, if you will, to a desired action, and that's the then condition. So if this happens, then we will do this. It almost sounds a bit too simple, or even maybe a bit stupid when you think about this for the first time. But when you will start applying this in real life, you'll find out how hard this actually is, and how helpful if-then planning can be. It really helps in pinpointing crucial situations. These are the if conditions, If we notice that someone is not speaking up in a meeting, if we notice that people are not following new policy or processes, if we notice that the culture in a team is becoming unsafe, you want to be able to pinpoint very critical specific situations and then engineer a then condition. So what do we do when we encounter these if situations? What are our plans? And this is what the if-then plan consists of. So I'll give you an example in just a bit, but you'll know how this sounds simple, but when you are in a complex organizational change, maybe you're in the project, maybe you're one of the stakeholders that is driving it, maybe you're one of the leaders that's supporting it, you might be under stress, under time pressure. There might be tons of other things going on, and you want to clearly be able to see, okay, if A happens, then we'll do B. And if Z happens, then we'll do Y. And especially at the leadership level, you want leaders to internalize this. And we'll go through how that works right now. So you want to start with pinpointing the desired behavior and situation. So you want to identify the if condition first, and then you're going to formulate a then plan based on that. So for example, it could be active listening in meetings. We want people to listen more actively in meetings. We want our managers and leaders to practice active listening and active inquiry so that they become more empathic in meetings and in their one-on-one management tactics, for example. Now, then you want to create the if-then plan, and you want to craft this very carefully. You want to be very specific in both the if condition and even more specific and clear in the then condition. So, for example, if someone on my team speaks, then I will pay full attention, acknowledging their input, and paraphrase to confirm mutual understanding. And I know it sounds weird out of context, but you want this level of specificity. Imagine if you are a change manager, or you're someone that is driving change, and these changes are all about psychological safety. That's what you want in your organization. You want to involve leaders. You want them to support this change. But if you just say, can you behave more psychologically safe, or can you make sure that psychological safety is prioritized within your teams, you're not going to get to concrete behavior change. This is important, but you want to make it more clear. You want to tell them, if someone on your team speaks, then you should pay full attention, acknowledge their input, and do a quick paraphrasing so that they confirm mutual understanding. You want to really zoom in on specific behaviors. Specific behaviors are something that you can role model, that you can demonstrate, that you can copy, because otherwise chances that behavior change will occur are going to be very, very small. It's going to sound stupid from the outside, but when you actually do this in change management, you'll find out how helpful this can be. And of course, then you have to internalize these if-then plans. You may have to rehearse them if they're complex. We have worked with a leadership team at a global healthcare organization about team contracts, about creating these if-then plans to make sure that they can perform as a high-performing leadership team and support their people. And we created 4 if-then plans that are very, very specific, that are aiming at decision-making, that are aiming at communication, that are aiming at agility, and that are aiming at prioritization. And we've made them so specific and rehearsed them in scenarios and documented them in a Kanban system so that they are very aware of these fundamental if-then plans. Even if the roof is on fire, even if people are yelling at you from a 360-degree angle, you know what to do in these specific if-then situations. And that can be the core of behavior change in your organization. So you want to be able to share these if-then plans as well. I know of cases where senior leaders in an organization wrote down their preferred if-then plan, something that they want to role model to the organization, held the sign up above their head. These signs were photographed and these pictures were distributed on intranet, on SharePoint, and even printed for the town halls and stuff like that. You can be very creative in how you share these if-then plans, as long as they are very clear, aim at specific situations and specific behaviors. Okay, so again, we'll do some Q&A later on. So if you have questions, make sure to note them down, and we'll be sure to cover them after these 2 more interventions. Okay, so if-then planning, it can help you by pinpointing these specific key behaviors. It can really help in simplifying behavioral execution under stress. And again, that's key. When the roof is on fire, you need to make sure that you know what to do, the people around you know what to do, and the people that you manage or that you drive change with also know what to do. These if-then plans can link that in a very effective way. They're the core for habit formation and role modeling. Now, let's go to another intervention. And here we shift from the perspective of helping leaders support change to the leadership perspective in supporting change. So do this mental exercise with me. You are now a senior leader in an organization that is undergoing a significant change, and they are relying on you to make considerate decisions and impactful decisions that will decide the fate of this change, whether it works or not. But you are not too actively and operationally involved. You're a senior leader that is sponsoring this change. How can you do that effectively? The first tactic, the first intervention that can help you here is called re-anchoring. And I'm going to go into why this is very important through the lens of the anchoring bias. And then I'll tell you all about how this can help you become way more effective as a leader in resource allocation decisions. How can you make sure that you allocate the right amount of resources to organizational change projects? Resources like time, resources like money, resources like employees, resources in technology. It's an all-encapsulating strategy for them. So re-anchoring, we can't explain re-anchoring if we don't first look at anchoring itself. You might have heard of the anchoring bias. It's a cognitive bias that is especially persistent in resource allocation decisions and buying decisions. Anchoring is a mental bias that gives us the tendency to weigh the first piece of information that we receive as very, very heavy and very, very much heavier as the other information that is coming in after that. So the first thing that we hear is going to stick in our mind and is going to weigh way more heavily on our decisions than the second, third, and fourth argument that we hear. This is causing a lot of problems in business decision-making. And I'll make this very concrete for you. The Fortune 500 companies, they did an extensive research on their annual budget decision-making process. And what they noticed is that the biggest predictor of the annual budget in Fortune 500 companies was last year's budget. So this is completely crazy because in a year, everything can change, but yet that piece of information, that anchor of last year's budget, is what is very much deciding in how they calculate this year's budget. This is a cognitive bias, so leaders are not aware of this. Leaders are not aware of how to mitigate this often. And it is causing very, very skewed decisions when it comes down to resource allocation, which ultimately results in change initiatives being very, very much underfunded in both time, in money, and in employees available. So we need to do something about this. And that is where the re-anchoring technique might come in very handy. To make this concrete, because I have to tell you, this is one of the more complex evidence-based interventions in our book, but also in the landscape of evidence-based change interventions. And to make this a bit more understandable and practical, we're going to go through this by a use case. And this is a fictional use case that we based on a factual project. And it's a fictional use case about a company called Green Tech. And Green Tech is going to start an organizational change because they're going to venture in new solar project technology. But they run the risk of this project being very, very underfunded due to the resource allocation decisions that were made to plan this project. So stick with me here. I know this is a complex one, but it can be very, very crucial when it comes to resource allocation. So re-anchoring is a technique that was developed by Daniel Kahneman, who you might know. He's the professor that wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, and his colleague Olivier Sibony, who wrote his second book with him, Noise. So these guys are heavy hitters when it comes to psychological and behavioral interventions. And they designed these interventions, this intervention specifically to tackle that persistent problem of resource allocation, to help leaders make more accurate decisions about how many resources are needed in a more objective, in a more data-driven, and in a more successful way. So back to the case. We have Green Tech, and Green Tech is going into this project where they want new solar panel technology, and they need to make decisions about what resources are needed for this. The first thing that needs to happen is the leaders making the decision need to be aware of anchoring bias. So imagine you're one of those leaders. You've been to a Neurofied training and you learned all about anchoring bias. So you introduce this concept in your leadership team. You say, hey, well, this data, this research shows that anchoring has a really strong effect on how we make budgeting decisions and can be very negative for this solar panel project that we're planning. We should look into this. This raises awareness for anchoring in the first place. Then, when people are reacting positively, I'd be like, okay, maybe we should do something to mitigate this bias in our decision making, because it's true. In the end, last year, we also underfunded some projects due to maybe this bias. So what you want to do next is gather very, very factual data about what this solar panel technology project might look like. And you're going to do that by engaging the help of business analysts or of managers that are working in this company. And you're going to give them the assignment to look for only objective, factual data about what similar projects would cost. So they venture out, they do extensive market research on solar panel technology, and based on very objective data, they gather facts and information about what the cost of this might look like. So the meeting is postponed. You come back. There's another budgeting meeting where you're closer to making the decision. Your business analysts or your managers, they have given you a report only based on factual data of the industry that you're working in, with a cost estimate of what this solar panel technology project might cost. So you present that to the team, but you frame it in the following way. You say, this is a factual anchor based on data. This doesn't have to be the number that we decide to go with in the end, but we have to weigh this against our intuitions. We have to weigh this second anchor against our first anchor. The first anchor is, what the leaders intuitively think this project will cost in terms of time, in terms of resources. So do you see what's happening here? Your intuition, that includes anchoring bias, will already have an idea. You're a seasoned leader about, maybe it will cost an X amount of $1 million or $1 billion to get this project done right. and you know that this is influencing decision making, but then you commissioned this report that is not factoring in any intuition or any past experience. It's solely based on facts, which will probably offer a wildly different number. So you introduce a second anchor to make sure that your decision making is not skewed. And I know this is hard to understand. Please refer to the book or to the channels, to the videos on our channel for more in-depth information about this. But now you have a second anchor, and you can use that in the way that you make your final decision. You analyze the difference between the initial anchor, you know, what your team initially thought this was going to cost in terms of time, resources, employees, money, and this very, very logical fact-based anchor. And usually when companies use this re-anchoring technique, they end up going somewhere in the middle. So they don't go for the initial anchor, they don't go for the second fact-based anchor, but always, almost always, their initial estimate is being corrected by a pretty significant instance, because now you have a second anchor to weigh in your decision making. And this is what green tech is doing as well. This is revealing the disparities in their initial estimate, and it's making them review how much money they're going to allocate to this project in a more fact-based way. And it will positively impact their final decision, because this time it will be more realistic than if they only relied on their initial expertise and intuition while making this decision. And of course, open discussion is absolutely key here. When you make a decision within the leadership team, you want to have a discussion about the potential impact of anchoring bias. You want to have a discussion about the potential estimate that you might have, the initial estimate based on past experience, based on your intuition as a leadership team. You want to have an open discussion about the second anchor that is introduced, that is solely based on data, solely based on factual data. And then you want to factor all of that into the final decision. When we take this fictional use case out of context, it might sound like this is something that, you know, leaders are already doing by a big extent, that data analysts are already very involved in these types of decision making. But often in reality, we don't see that back in the data. We don't see that this is done in a systematic way because there's no systematic process for it. Now, re-anchoring can be that systematic process that helps you recalibrate your decision making. Okay, so when you adjust the final decision that you make, it's under discussion with the leadership team. And as I said before, it will usually be an estimate that is somewhere between the initial number and the fact-based number that is coming from the second answer, from the second anchor. And that is also how green tech in this case finally decides on a conservative estimate that is different from the initial decision, but factors in that second anchor as well. So I'm aware this is quite a complex evidence-based intervention. This is probably something that is done over multiple days, if not weeks, in leadership teams when they're making decisions. But think about it, when you are engaging in a big organizational transformation, in a large-scale change, you want to be able to make planning decisions and allocation decisions that will set you up for success, and that will not ultimately drive the entire organization crazy because there are not enough resources available. Re-anchoring is a very, very, very solid tool that can help you do this, because it directly mitigates bias from process, not just from individuals, and it has measurable impact on the accuracy of your decision making. Now, we went through this quite fast, but I encourage you to, if you find this interesting, to read on about re-anchoring, because there's a lot of research that's been published with step-by-step protocols, you know, including our channel and our book as well, that will help you. They will help you as a step-by-step guide in going through this. Now, I'm going to go through one last intervention with you, and I promise this one is not as complex as re-anchoring, but it might be just as important. It's called gradual escalation of commitment. And it's, again, one of those interventions that is designed for senior leaders in the organization. And it is designed to help them make early decisions into promising change initiatives without over-promising resources or without over-investing resources. And this has everything to do with that sunk cost fallacy that we talked about before. We want to avoid a situation where we keep investing in a failing project or keep investing in a project that is not paying off as we wanted it to. That is where this intervention called gradual escalation of commitment comes in. It is actually based on or borrowed from venture capitalist approaches. They usually call these toehold acquisitions, where they invest a small amount of resources or a small amount of capital into a promising venture. And then when they notice that it's meeting criteria, they invest more. This is great in calibrated risk taking, and it also avoids big gambles, big bet decisions that in the end, turn out not to be so great. And, it puts your organization and your team on a very agile and innovative path. It directly links with these challenges in leadership support, where oftentimes leaders don't have a full understanding of what is going on in different bottom-up grassroots change initiatives in the organization. Oftentimes leaders are managing multiple change projects, or not managing, but are sponsoring or supporting multiple change projects at the time. And communication is not accurate. They're not sure whether they should or should not invest more or less into different change projects. And this is causing problems in maintaining sponsorship. It could be that sponsorship is very sporadic, or that it's way too much or way too little, or anything in between. Now, these challenges can be overcome with gradual escalation of commitment. As I said, it is a venture capitalized approach. And aside from being great at making sure that you don't invest too much capital at once for change projects and that you can build it gradually, it also, and this is very important, it minimizes the risk of emotional damage for the hands-on change managers or the managers that are driving change in the projects. Now, let me explain this a bit more in depth. Oftentimes when we have bottom-up or grassroots change initiatives in organizations, we have some managers or some change advocates that are very passionate about this. It's almost like their baby, almost. They have this idea of, when we do this, the organization is going to become so much better. I'm going to put my heart and soul into it. Now, as a senior leader, you want to be able to give these opportunities the chance to flourish without overpromising resources, but also without cutting it mid-project out of nowhere and leaving the stakeholders involved, very damaged in that way, because this is where we see a lot of emotional damage in organizations, initiatives that are just being cut like that. Now, gradual escalation of commitment can help you mitigate that problem. And now, without further ado, let's get into how you can do this step by step. It starts with you as a senior leader that is sponsoring a change initiatives, identifying promising bottom-up change initiatives. So we see, for example, a project about sustainability in our organization, or maybe one that is about creating a culture of inclusion. And we, as leaders, we identify, this is could be a very impactful problem that is also scoring high on feasibility. And it aligns quite nicely with the strategic goals that we have set for our company already. So you want to have this compass of, what bottom-up change initiatives are worth pursuing. Then you want to get together with the stakeholders that drive this and set very clear, measurable objectives on, what do we want to reach with this? In 3 to 6 months, what is this going to look like? How do you see this aligning with the overarching organizational goals? And if these are set, then you can allocate, for example, maybe 20% or 25% of the total budget that is needed, or maybe 10%, who knows, upfront, and say, okay, let's see first what you can make of this partial budget, this toehold, as they call it in venture capital. And let's see how you will do after, 3 months or 4 months, and we'll assess back again. And after these 3 or 4 months, the initial phase of the project is being put through. There should be some measurable results. And this can really help in putting together what psychologists call your sunset clause. So you already have predefined conditions that you set with the change team when you were planning this initiative, when you assigned the initial budget. And now you're merely just checking after 3 or 4 months, did we meet those conditions? Did we meet the metrics that we set at the start? Did we meet the progress that we set at the start? And does it look promising to continue this initiative? And this is where the minimizing of emotional damage comes in very handy, because stakeholders that are pushing and are driving this initiative are very aware of the sunset clause from the start. So they know that it might be that this project is discontinued. But if this is not communicated at the start, and if it's just, let's see what happens, and then it's cut, that is when you can get these heavy emotional damages on stakeholders, which, in the end, they will result in less employee engagement and higher turnover. It can kick in the whole cycle of problems. So the sunset clause is very important. And basically, that is it. This is an intervention that is quite a lot simpler. You set these initial conditions for promising change initiatives. You monitor for the sunset clause along as the project goes, 3 or 4 months in, maybe 5 or 6 months in. And then when you see, hey, this is going great, you gradually increase your commitments. You allocate more resources. You set up a plan for the coming years. And in this way, you can prune ineffective projects without having a lot of emotional damage or financial damage. And you can give room to bottom-up change initiatives that are doing very well. And as they're going along, you can monitor performance, you can adjust resource allocation based on how these projects are doing, and you can get a very nice feel and also, a quantifiable feel based on data of how these different projects are doing and how you as a leader can effectively sponsor and support them without drowning in operations. And that is the key of this intervention here. So the conclusion, gradual escalation of commitment, it helps you, it helps you increase commitments gradually to make sure that you encourage employees in bottom-up innovation without risking emotional damage or minimizing emotional damage, enhancing organizational resilience, and making sure that you can put a pedal to the metal on the change projects and the bottom-up innovations that are very promising, and that you're also able to discontinue projects that might not be promising, but you're doing it in a structured, fact-based, and less biased way. Okay, so these interventions that we covered today, if-then plan, re-anchoring, and gradual escalation of commitment are among the tougher interventions to explain, but also to apply, especially in this short-form webinar. But we hope to have given you at least a conceptual understanding of these interventions and some handholds, some steps that you can take to start implementing them. And of course, not everyone that is listening to this is a senior leader that is overseeing dozens of grassroots change projects, or is a senior leader that has the opportunity to escalate commitments gradually. But you can also do this in a very small scale. The same mental models and steps apply to small projects as well. You can use existing projects to apply these insights to. You can talk to your colleagues and encourage them to form if-then plans with you and to assess progress along the go. You can do this on both big and small scale. And usually when we are in this, very stressful, volatile, and uncertain times, it's good to start small. It's good to look at one of these interventions and be like, well, I want to try these if-then plans, but let's start small. Let's do a small experiment with a set of co-workers or one team or department, see if it works for your organization, collect data, assess success, and from there, scale it up. So I hope to have given you a little bit of inspiration to start experimenting with these interventions. And with that, I'm going to go to Q&A right now. At least that is, if not all of you want to have run to lunch by now. And you can always learn more about these interventions and more on our YouTube channel. We have a lot of webinars, playlists, etc. We have the book that is coming out, and there's a link in the chat if everything is according to plan. And we also have a lot of resources on the website, like bias databases, step-by-step guides. I would encourage, they're all the website and the YouTube channel, they're all free of cost. So I would definitely recommend you check those out. And with that, I'm going to stop the recording. We'll be back with another webinar in the next month about the next chapter in our book and evidence-based interventions. And I hope to see you there, of course. And I'll switch to Q&A right about now.